They told him he was making the other guests uncomfortable. Those were the exact words the manager used. Clipboard clutched like a badge, voice calm as he pointed toward the patio, as if exile in the morning cold was just protocol. Harold Jennings, 84, didn't argue. He didn't explain the faded tattoo on his wrist, dagger crossed through an anchor, didn't defend the way he held his coffee like it steadied something deeper than tremors. He simply nodded. Not out of agreement, but the kind of nod that belongs to men who have heard these words before, too many times in too many places. And so he stood, tray in one hand, cane in the other, eggs already cold, and began walking toward the door. No one helped. No one stopped the quiet humiliation. Until the bell above the entrance jingled, and a young Navy SEAL stepped in, froze, then stared through the glass. What happened next would make headlines, shift a town's soul, and remind a country that silence does not mean forgotten. If you still believe honor speaks louder than noise, stay with this story. Comment honor if you felt that moment tighten something in your chest. And if you still believe some men carry the mission long after the war ends, then this place, this channel, is yours too. Harold Jennings was 84 years old, though the faded leather bomber jacket he wore had seen winters far older than that. His back was slightly hunched, but there was still a quiet strength in how he walked, each step measured, each movement deliberate. His hands were rough, nicked with old scars, fingers slightly curled from years gripping steel and frost, but steady. His hair was a pale ash gray, combed neatly to the side, and his eyes, storm gray, steady, rarely looked away when spoken to, as if he still believed attention was a form of respect. He didn't say much, never had. The kind of man who fixed what was broken, whether it was a neighbor's faucet or a silence that needed filling. Every Sunday, at exactly 7:40 a.m., he caught the same bus into town and walked 3 blocks to Lincoln's Diner, rain or shine. He always chose the booth near the window. He never asked for menus, just nodded once and ordered the same thing. Scrambled eggs and dry toast, no substitutions. Always left a $1 tip, folded twice, placed precisely beneath his water glass. He lived alone in a 1-bedroom on the edge of town. Above the auto shop he ran by himself 6 days a week. No computer, no answering machine. The front sign, still hand-painted. Jennings Auto, since '72. Inside his apartment, there were no family photos, just a folded flag on a shelf above a dusty television, and a drawer of handwritten letters he never reread. 40 years ago, Harold had served with SEAL Team Bravo in the Pacific. Logistics officer, Darta. Communications specialist. The man who always knew how to get you out when radios went dead. His tattoo, a dagger crossed through an anchor, wasn't flashy. Just black ink now faded to blue, wrinkled into the skin above his left wrist. But to those who knew, it meant something. It meant G7. It meant survival. Most people didn't notice. Some did and still looked away. Teenagers once asked if it was fake. Once, a woman scoffed. "You people always want sympathy." He never corrected them. He didn't need their permission to exist. But last Sunday, as he stepped into the diner and made his way to his usual booth, something changed. The air felt thinner. The laughter from the center table was too sharp, too loud. And when he sat down, someone across the room didn't just look at him. They smirked, a kind of smirk that wasn't new. But this time, it lingered. The coffee hadn't even cooled when it began. From the center booth, 4 men in their 40s, all matching golf jackets and weekend arrogance. One of them nodded toward Harold's table and muttered, "Bet he drew that on with a pen." Another snorted, "No vet eats alone, without a badge." The third lifted his mug like a toast, smirking. "If he's a SEAL, I'm the president." Laughter followed, not loud, not brave, just sharp enough to cut. No one stopped them. Harold said nothing. He didn't flinch, didn't lift his gaze. Both hands stayed wrapped around his water glass like it was the last warm thing left. There was no anger in his face. No shame either. Just stillness. Heavy, solid, practiced. Then Todd, the manager with his clipboard, tie askew and smile too wide, walked over and leaned toward Harold's booth. "Sir," he said, voice light, "we've had a couple of complaints. Some guests feel uncomfortable. Would you mind moving to the patio?" The sentence was clean, rehearsed, delivered like it was nothing. The diner didn't go silent, but something shifted. Forks paused. Conversation slowed. Behind the counter, the young waitress gripped the handle of the coffee pot and didn't blink. Harold gave a single nod. Not of agreement. Just routine. He stood slowly, balanced the tray in one hand, cane in the other, and began to move. Every step was deliberate. The prosthetic leg beneath his jeans clicked quietly against the tile floor. As he passed the table, one of the men raised his cup again, louder this time. "Enjoy the fresh air, General." Their laughter followed him to the door. And then it happened. One tear. Just one. Slipped down Harold's cheek, fell to the ground, and disappeared into the floor tile like it had nowhere else to go. Nobody spoke. Nobody helped. Nobody even shifted in their seat. The wind caught the glass door as he pushed it open. It resisted for a second, then gave in. Outside, the patio was cold. Empty. He chose the table farthest from the door and sat down without a sound. His scrambled eggs were cold. He didn't touch them. Inside, the air felt warm again. People resumed their meals. The manager walked away like nothing had happened. The four men at the center booth kept smiling. The waitress stared at her shoes. Then, without fanfare, the bell above the door jingled. A young man stepped in, early 30s, military straight, jacket tight across squared shoulders, haircut high and tight. He didn't smile. Didn't look around. His eyes locked directly on the booth where Harold had been, then to the window, then to the man outside, sitting alone with a sleeve rolled just high enough for a symbol to show. A dagger, crossed through an anchor. And just like that, the diner fell still. Even the coffee machine stopped hissing. That was the moment. The air remembered who he was. The door creaked open again, quiet this time. But something about it shifted the air like a storm front, arriving without sound. The man who stepped in didn't speak. Didn't need to. His posture did all the talking. Back straight, shoulders squared, every step calibrated like he was still walking through hostile territory. He wore a dark overcoat, military cut, the collar stiff against his neck. His boots hit the floor like they remembered marching. Clean-shaven, eyes narrow, jaw locked. His presence didn't ask for attention. It commanded it. His name was Jackson Miles. He was 32, Navy SEAL, still active, still sharp, and the last person anyone in that diner expected to walk through those doors on a sleepy Sunday morning. But the second he stepped in, the jukebox glitched to silence mid-verse, like even the music held its breath. Forks stopped mid-air. The waitress behind the counter froze, her hand hovering over the pot of coffee like she forgot what she was doing. Jackson didn't glance around. He didn't need to. His eyes locked instantly on Harold Jennings, sitting alone on the patio in the cold. One hand still resting on his cane, the other tracing the edge of his untouched plate. Jackson saw the tattoo, dagger through anchor, and everything else fell away. He took one step forward, then another. Slow, deliberate. The sound of his boots on linoleum rang louder than any insult had minutes before. The four men at the center booth, so loud before, went suddenly still. One of them shifted in his seat. Another looked down at his cup like it had just become the most important thing in the world. Nobody said a word. Nobody had to. Jackson reached the window. The wind outside caught the door again, slammed it shut behind him with a crack that made everyone flinch. He didn't stop. He opened the patio door like it was muscle memory, stepped into the chill, and walked straight toward the man who hadn't even looked up yet. Then, as if the moment had been waiting for its cue, he stopped, just 2 feet from the table, stood tall, raised his hand in a crisp, practiced salute. "Sir," he said, voice low, but carrying through the glass like a bell. "Are you Harold Jennings of SEAL Team Bravo?" Harold looked up, slowly, cautiously, the way a man does when he doesn't expect anything good. The wind tugged at his coat sleeve, revealing the full tattoo. Jackson's breath caught. His eyes glistened, just briefly. "G7, isn't it, sir?" he said, voice cracking at the edges. "They still talk about you in training." Harold didn't speak, just stared. Then finally, one slow nod. Jackson didn't drop the salute. "Permission to sit, sir." Harold gestured softly to the empty seat across from him. "Of course, son." Jackson sat, rigid, reverent. Inside, the silence deepened. Nobody moved. Not the manager. Not the waitress. Not the 4 men, who now sat like schoolboys caught in a lie. And then Jackson turned his head, just slightly, looked directly at them through the window, and said nothing. But his eyes, they said everything. No one needed an introduction. Everyone knew what came next. The diner didn't creak, didn't groan, didn't breathe. It just stopped. Even the jukebox, still spinning some forgotten country tune moments ago, now stood silent like it knew reverence had walked in. Jackson Miles turned from the patio and moved toward the center booth. Not fast, not slow, just with the kind of deliberate rhythm that made even footsteps feel like statements. The room parted for him without needing to. Heads turned, eyes followed. Forks hovered midair, and not a soul said a word. The 4 men at the center booth, once smug, once loud, looked up. The ringleader, the one who'd mocked the tattoo, leaned back in his seat, trying to wear a smirk that now cracked at the edges. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice flat, trying to reclaim a high ground he never had. Jackson didn't answer with anger. He didn't raise his voice, didn't take another step. He just reached into the inside pocket of his coat, pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and held it at an angle. One photo, not a video, not a threat. A worn grayscale image. 2 soldiers in jungle camo, dirt smeared and laughing. One of them, unmistakably Harold Jennings. The other, Jackson's grandfather. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about a man who never said much but always brought everyone home," Jackson said, tone steady like a held note. "I didn't know he was real, until now." The smirk vanished. Not abruptly, but like fog lifting. The man blinked. Once. Then again. And then as he leaned forward just slightly to see the screen better, his jaw shifted, like it had been unhinged by something heavier than fists. Jackson's voice dropped lower. "If you feel uncomfortable sitting near a man whose name is still redacted in some files, maybe the discomfort's not his to carry." No one laughed. No one moved. Even the manager, halfway through pretending to wipe menus, froze mid-motion. The coffee pot hissed once, then nothing. The second man at the booth, who had earlier snorted into his cup, stood up. Not defiantly, just quietly. Left his plate full. Walked out without looking back. The third followed, muttering something no one heard. The fourth stayed, but his hands, resting flat on the table, had started to tremble. The leader didn't move, but his eyes dropped to the floor. His spine straightened, but not from pride. From pressure. From presence. Jackson didn't blink. "You mocked a man who once carried 17 wounded across fire because the radio failed. Who made it back on one leg and didn't ask for a headline." And still, no one interrupted. Because everyone knew what was happening here wasn't about volume. It was about gravity. The last image before the moment passed was this. The loudest man in the room. Silent. And Jackson Miles, standing tall over a silence that didn't beg for submission, but demanded it. And when the door finally swung open again, none of the remaining men dared look up. The silence didn't break, it deepened, as if the walls themselves were listening. Jackson didn't move. His phone still glowed faintly in his hand, the black and white photo of Harold Jennings flickering in the reflection of the coffee-stained window behind him. Then, from the counter, a voice, small, almost afraid, spoke. "I saw it," the waitress said. Everyone turned. She wasn't trembling, but her voice carried that careful weight of someone finally stepping out from the shadows of complicity. "I saw what he said to Mr. Jennings. All of it. And I told the manager. He told me to stay quiet." Her eyes shifted to Todd, the manager, who stood frozen, clipboard in hand, caught mid-breath. Jackson said nothing. He didn't need to. The ringleader, whose voice had once filled this diner, shifted in his seat. But now the confidence was gone. His shoulders slumped. "It was just a joke," he muttered, barely above a whisper, eyes darting toward the exit. "People joke all the time." "You mocked a man for his service," the waitress replied, louder now, and then had him pushed outside like trash. From the corner booth, an elderly couple stared down at their coffee. One of them whispered, "That's Harold Jennings? The SEAL?" The other just nodded, eyes glassy. Someone near the kitchen muttered, "I thought he was homeless." Todd, the manager, tried to interject, raising a hand. "Let's not make this dramatic." But it was too late. From the doorway came the sharp clap of a badge being shown. The local sheriff, graying hair, clean uniform, slow steps, walked in without haste. His boots didn't stomp. They announced. Not with noise, but with the weight of history. "I got a call from a Navy base 3 states over," he said, voice like gravel. Said a young man named Miles reported harassment of a decorated SEAL. "Sent me a citation file the size of my desk." He glanced down at the booth. "Said it was time we remembered who built this town's respect." The ringleader tried to speak. Some protest half-formed, but the words collapsed under their own weakness. His lips parted. Nothing came out. "Sir," the sheriff said, nodding once at Harold through the glass. "We'd like to make this right." Harold didn't move, just blinked slowly, then gave the faintest nod. The sheriff turned back. "Mr. Weller," he said to the loud man. "First time we heard the name. You're coming with me. For harassment, for obstruction, and for being the kind of man who thinks silence is a shield." A handcuff clicked. Not loudly, not theatrically, just final. Mr. Weller didn't fight. His eyes dropped. His mouth stayed shut. And as he passed Harold's table on the way out, he didn't offer an apology, because shame had taken his voice first. Inside the diner, no one clapped. No one cheered. But something changed. The waitress wiped her hands on her apron and walked quietly outside. She placed a fresh plate of eggs on Harold's table. No charge, no words. And as the door closed behind the sheriff and Weller, the sound echoed. Not like justice shouting, but like decency returning. The door had closed minutes ago, but its echo still lingered, floating somewhere between guilt and awakening. No one moved at first. The diner seemed unsure how to breathe again, as if exhaling too soon might shatter the fragile air left behind. The counter waitress stood frozen with her towel, eyes flickering toward Harold Jennings, then lowering just as quickly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. A young busboy, barely 20, quietly stepped out from the kitchen. His apron was stained, his hands shaking slightly, as he reached for the plate Harold hadn't touched. But instead of clearing it, he laid a clean napkin beside it, gently folded. Then, with a glance that held no words, only respect, he gave a slight nod and backed away. At the far table, a middle-aged man who hadn't said a thing since the confrontation stood. His movements were stiff. He approached Harold's booth, paused, and removed his cap. "I should have said something," he murmured, barely audible. "Years ago." Harold didn't look up. His eyes were fixed on the window, where the reflection of the American flag outside trembled slightly in the breeze. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. One by one, others began to stir, not in a rush, not in spectacle. A woman near the jukebox walked past and placed a small folded $5 bill on the table's edge. She didn't explain. An old man near the register turned and said, more to himself than anyone, "That patch on his sleeve, I remember those men. They didn't talk much. They just did." Someone offered Harold a fresh cup of coffee. Someone else refilled the sugar tray without being asked. Even Todd, the manager, who had spent the past 10 minutes trying to blend into the wallpaper, emerged from behind the counter. He opened his mouth as if to apologize, but no words came. Instead, he picked up the check and tore it down the center. No charge. Jackson said nothing either. He sat across from his father, posture straight, gaze calm. He didn't need to explain the silence, because it was working. Outside, a few passers-by paused at the window. They didn't enter. They just looked in and saw a man in a bomber jacket sipping cold coffee as if nothing had happened. As if nothing needed to be said. Harold finally spoke. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady. "I didn't serve for a seat. I served so we all could sit together." And in that moment, the diner changed. Not forever. Not in a headline. But in the soft way eyes shifted. Back straightened. Hands found purpose again. No applause came. No music resumed. But as Harold looked once more to the flag, faded, fraying slightly at the edge, he nodded once, almost to himself, and whispered, "This place used to feel like home. Maybe it can be again." Under the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the scent of brewed coffee that never really left the walls, the old diner began to change. Not all at once, not loudly, but like snow melting under morning sun. Where Harold Jennings had once been told to leave, now stood a glass case just beside the register, flanked by two quiet flags, one American, one navy blue. Inside the case sat his faded cap, a folded napkin, and a small brass plaque that read simply, "For those who served and stayed." No grand ceremony had marked its arrival. One day it was just there, and everyone who entered seemed to instinctively lower their voice near it. The stool Harold had used wasn't replaced. It was polished. And above it, framed in walnut, hung a candid photo. Harold sitting, eyes half closed, coffee in hand, sunlight slicing through the blinds behind him. Someone had written in tiny cursive beneath it, "Quiet strength doesn't ask to be seen. It just remains." No official proclamation had been issued. No politician showed up for photos. It was the community, those who had watched and not acted, those who had whispered apologies in silence, who made it happen. A local high school history teacher brought her class one Tuesday morning and stood them in front of that case. No lecture, just a question. "What do you think it means to serve?" The room stayed quiet for nearly 5 minutes. That was the lesson. Later that month, a group of young cadets from the local ROTC program showed up in uniform. Not for a parade. Not for attention. They ordered coffee, sat near Harold's table, and waited. When he arrived, slower than usual, cane steady, they stood. Not all at once, but like waves catching rhythm. No one spoke. One cadet, barely 18, walked over and offered his seat. Harold declined with a small smile, then nodded toward the open booth. They sat together. No ranks. Just respect. Jackson never told the story online. But someone else did. A woman at the next table posted a photo. A few lines. Nothing dramatic. It went viral overnight. Not for outrage, but for stillness. The kind that catches people mid-scroll and makes them stop. Soon, letters started arriving, handwritten, typed, printed from dusty inkjets. From other towns, other states, other veterans. Some just said, "Thank you." Others told their own stories. Most asked for nothing. Harold read each one, folded them neatly, placed them in the shoebox beneath the flag in his living room. He never replied. He didn't have to. And each Tuesday, the diner would pause, just slightly, when the door creaked open and that brown leather jacket entered. A nod here, a glance there, a quiet acknowledgement that something sacred had passed through. And on the wall, above the counter, the photo remained, still undisturbed, glowing softly under the amber light. He never asked for that space. He never needed to. It became his, the way sunlight belongs to morning, without asking, without sound. Under the golden hush of a late afternoon, when the world outside had softened into amber and shadow, Harold Jennings and his son sat alone in the booth by the window, where the light always fell just right on days that mattered. The rest of the diner faded into background blur, a quiet hum of dishes and distant voices. But here, in this little frame of silence, time had folded in on itself. 2 generations, shoulder to shoulder, saying more with stillness than words ever could. 2 mugs sat in front of them, neither steaming, neither touched. They had gone cold, and no one minded. Across the table, Jackson leaned forward, his forearms resting on the scratched wood, fingers gently tapping once, then still. He looked at his father, not with expectation, not with apology, but like a man trying to trace the outlines of someone he'd always known but never fully seen. "You okay, old man?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Harold didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the street outside, where a single leaf was tumbling in slow spirals across the pavement. When he finally turned, his face carried the kind of expression only decades can carve, something between exhaustion and peace. "Didn't think I'd need you again," he said softly. Jackson nodded. That was all. No reaction, no smile. Just a nod that accepted the weight of what wasn't being said. Then, without a word, Jackson reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the old service cap, creased, weathered, the insignia dulled with time, and placed it gently on the table. It slid slightly toward his father, stopping halfway between them. Neither moved to claim it. Harold looked down at it. Then he reached out, not to take the cap, but to lay his hand flat over Jackson's for a moment. Rough fingers on younger ones, calluses meeting calluses, and in that single gesture, everything hardened inside the room began to soften. A song played on the old jukebox behind the counter. Some slow tune from the 50s, saxophone and vinyl crackle blending into the air like smoke. The waitress didn't interrupt. A child across the room dropped a spoon, and the sound echoed like a bell, delicate and brief. They sat like that until the light began to shift, crawling slowly off their table and up the far wall, taking the day with it. Then, quietly, without ceremony, Harold took the cap, stood up, and placed it on his head. Jackson stood too. No salute, no embrace. Just a shared look, and a long exhale. And then, together, they turned toward the door, not as soldier and son, not even as father and child, but as men bound by something older than either uniform or blood, a knowing. Outside, the sun had nearly gone, but the sky still held the memory of light. And as they stepped through the doorway and disappeared into that fading warmth, the booth behind them remained empty, except for 2 cups and a table still warm from presents. They didn't put up a statue of Harold Jennings. No street got renamed, no holiday declared. But if you walk through that town now, you'll feel him. You'll hear it in the way Mr. Lyle, the barber, lowers the music in his shop when an old veteran walks in, and hands him the chair without a word. You'll see it in the high school hallway, where a history teacher leaves a folded newspaper, clipping about Harold's quiet act of dignity taped to her door, not as a lesson, but as a mirror. You'll find it in a library where a stack of hand-folded letters from 8th graders, some messy, some perfect, sits beside a photo of Harold in uniform, their words not polished but true. It started quietly. A Sunday school kid asked his pastor if they could pray for the brave man at the diner. A teenager who once mocked an old man in a parking lot now held the door open for a stranger in fatigues. At the town's only gas station, someone had painted over the word "freak" on the brick wall, replaced it with "Frank, respect." Harold never said a thing. He didn't tell his side of the story, didn't correct the rumors, didn't linger in the places where people now stood a little straighter. He just kept living. Slowly, steadily, like he always had, watering his lawn at 6 sharp, polishing his boots every Sunday, nodding politely when kids waved from their bikes. But others spoke for him. Jackson never mentioned the confrontation again, but he told his daughter one night, "Your grandfather didn't just teach me to stand up. He showed me when to stay seated." And the diner. They kept the booth by the window open. Never reserved, never claimed. And on its table sat nothing but a small wooden plaque that read, "He asked for nothing, but he gave us back everything we forgot." The wind shifted in town. Small flags appeared in front yards where they'd never been before. A boy no one expected signed up for the junior OTK. A girl wrote her college essay about the man who taught our town how to listen. The story reached beyond the street where it started, passed in whispers at church gatherings, shared in barbershop chairs, printed in the last page of the county bulletin. No hashtags, no headlines. Just hands shaking firmer, eyes meeting longer, hearts remembering. And on one quiet morning, long after the news trucks had left, a boy barely 10 years old walked into the library, stood before Harold's photo, and didn't speak. He just saluted, awkward, lopsided, earnest, then picked up a history book and sat by the window where the light fell soft. The legacy wasn't loud, but it echoed. Still does. Harold Jennings didn't stand to make a speech. He didn't raise a hand or clear his throat. He just walked to the old flag outside the diner, the same pole where once the wind had torn at faded cloth, and, with steady fingers, clipped on a fresh folded banner, someone had left for him in silence. Red, white, and blue. No wrinkles. He didn't salute. He simply stood. The town stood too. Slowly, as if learning how to again. Someone turned down the radio. A child hushed his question. An old man took off his hat. And for a full minute, the street forgot to breathe. Not out of habit, but out of something older. Something deeper. Then, in a voice soft enough to miss if you weren't listening, Harold looked at his son and said, "Turns out, you don't have to be loud to be remembered. You just have to keep standing." And he did, as the flag rose behind him, and the silence settled not like absence, but like honor. If that moment meant something to you, stay with it. Let it linger. Comment stand if you believe dignity doesn't need noise. And if you're someone who still believes quiet men carry the loudest lessons, this is the place. We're here to remember. Hit that bell not for updates, but for remembrance.